Welcome back for our fourth and final video in the research methodology series. Hopefully you will find this video helpful in helping you to understand the difference between quantitative and qualitative research. This will be the last one that we will do in this series. But as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and I'll help you any way I can. So getting started, qualitative research, what is that? Qualitative research, your book will define it as the numerical examination of the interpretation of observations for the purpose of discovering underlying meanings and patterns in relationships, most typically found in field or historical research. It's a good definition. However, what I find is a lot of times students listen to that and they go, huh? What? What did she say? I don't know what that means. So that's why I wanted to make sure we try to clarify that. Qualitative research, what we're looking for are trends. We're looking for information, we're looking for data, we're going to be measuring things like feeling or response. We're not going to necessarily going to get the concrete numbers. There are so many things that we're not able to get a number. We're not going to be able to put our finger on it. We're not going to get that exact precise piece that we want, yet it still offers a lot of really valuable information that we want to use. It's typically used in your field research, or it's going to be used in your historical research, where we're looking at patterns, we're looking at trends, we're looking at information of things that happen without being able to necessarily measure it. Your book will talk about 6 different ways where we look for those patterns. One of those is frequency. So when we're studying something, when we're looking at something, again, it can be historic, or it could be happening in field research, is frequency. More people came. We changed this thing and we had bigger results. There was an increase in numbers, whatever that is. Or less people came. This thing changed and we had a decrease in population. And we went to different places. We studied it multiple different times. And whenever we added this, we had more people, or we had less people, or we had more business, or we had less business. We look at things like magnitude. This is when the numbers are there, the numbers are concrete, they haven't really shifted that much. However, the intensity is up there. So we have the same number of shoppers, but they spent more money. We have the same number of students studying, but they studied longer. That type of thing. Structures, which is where we're going to be looking at different types of subcategories or different trends that we see. People tended to do this or tended to do that when they were in that grouping. So they still shopped, but they tended to buy more clothes, or they tended to buy more music, that kind of thing. Students stayed and studied, but they stayed in a particular area. Common patterns are going to be identified. So people tended to do this particular thing. They came and they circulated the store in a certain way, or they came into the library, and when we added the coffee shop, they tended to go to the shop first and then study, or they studied and then they went to the coffee shop and then they studied again and they stayed longer, that kind of thing. We're going to be looking at processes, we're going to be looking at causes, and we're going to be looking at consequences. So what thing changed that caused something to look different, what caused the environment to change, or what was the consequence of a particular thing, and how did it affect things. Frequently, these are things that we can't recreate in experimental studies. For many reasons, they've already occurred, the numbers are too big, we can't find a concrete way in which to study it, or it would be unethical in which to study it. This is when we might look at a case analysis type of thing. If you look at a sample of something, let's say, with somebody who had Ebola. We recently had such a terrible outbreak of Ebola, and it was a terrible, terrible thing. And let's say we're trying to research whether a certain medication or a certain medical intervention made a difference, maybe both at the time, but also long-term. So long-term, did it help when we added physical therapy or something like that? So we're going to be studying the individual case, what the results are, what the outcomes were. It would obviously be unethical for us to give a whole bunch of people Ebola because we have this idea that if we added physical therapy, they would recover faster. Can't do that. We're not allowed to do that. But we can study those people and what the results are and those that moved around more or those kind of things and try to cross that information. Realistically, people heal differently. People suffered longer. People may have had other conditions that affected them. Women may respond differently than men, young from old, that kind of thing. So it's very, very difficult to say one thing caused the other or have concrete data. We can look at trends. We can look at information. We can look at data, or data in general. I mean, people tended to recover faster, or we saw this, or we saw that. And that may give us ideas of things that we might want to study in the future. We also look at something called semantics. Semantics are often done historical. They don't always have to be. And semantics can be things simply as clear as assigning the meaning to something. So here's the phenomenon that we know about. We absolutely know about it, yet we still tend to do it. In media across the board, in general, of course there's always exceptions, including school books, movies, television, cartoons, videos, boys tend to be taller, depicted as taller than girls. In general, men are usually about 6 inches taller than women, but as in school age, that's not always the case. However, when you look at the media, we tend to see men depicted as taller. They tend to be heavier, and they tend to be in front of girls, standing in front of girls. They also have more likely to be holding items of industry, where girls tend to be holding items of domesticity, meaning that girls are going to be holding a broom and a boy is going to be holding a tool. We know that this happens. We know it's not a good idea. We still do it. It still happens. It doesn't happen nearly as often as it used to happen, but it definitely still happens and it's still trending. So sometimes we might look at the comparison 50 years ago to today. We might want to look at, a particular group. We might want to, when you add ethnicity into it, it gets interesting there too. But we're going to be looking at information that's already there, and it's qualitative. We're going to say across the board, or in this many different countries, or in the North versus the South. We notice this over that. So what are we seeing, and what is the effect of that, or is there any effect of that? Why is it being done? Why is it happening? Again, there are things we know for women to men that don't necessarily apply to children. However, we still tend to see that. We also have quantitative research. Quantitative research is the hard facts, and that's really all it is. It doesn't measure opinion, it doesn't measure thoughts, it doesn't measure other contingencies or other factors that could be involved. It's just the cold, hard facts. When I think about quantitative work, I think of the program Numbers. You saw this guy, and he has all these numbers that create in his head, and he comes up with these formulas, and he comes up with his ideas. But there's some truth in that. While that's a fictional program, there's truth in numbers giving us data. We sometimes can get bogged down or confused or convoluted with all this other information and not allowing us to sit back and focus simply on the facts. This is just the data. These are just the numbers. We do tend to move towards a central factor because there's always going to be outliers. There's always going to be things that don't fit the way they're supposed to. That doesn't mean we ignore them. We need to be aware of them, particularly if they have any relevance or they're increasing or decreasing, but we generally are going to move towards that central factor. But these are the facts. We're looking for trends. We notice that people are buying more expensive houses, or people are getting married older or younger. These are just the numbers. It doesn't mean there's not that one guy who did it differently, but we're saying in general. In general, we're getting married later than we did 20 years ago. In general. That doesn't mean there's not a 17-year-old out there getting married, but it just means the general numbers. In general, we have less children than we had 50 years ago. Again, that doesn't explain the neighbor down the road with 12 kids. We're talking in general, we have these kind of factors. So this is the quantitative, concrete numbers that we do. It's also really important in how we memo and how we code information when we're doing our research, particularly those that are doing research school and doing research as a living. You're going to code and identify information so that later when you want to do research and you want to pull something up, by now you've already learned, you're going to write down, I want to study poverty, comma, and I want to study in children, comma, girls, comma, Kansas, comma, and you're going to pull up the data for those particular areas. The process is too huge. There's too much information on data on poverty. You can't do it. So you're going to narrow it and narrow it and narrow it. So how we code information can be very, very informative. When we're doing our coding, we may have even found auxiliary information. So while we were studying the headphones of children, using headphones with regard to reading, we might have said it seemed to be really beneficial for girls. But that wasn't, this is just auxiliary information. If I came back to study again, I'd want to know more about that. So somebody later interested in the same topic can read your research and decide to focus just on girls on headsets, or maybe studying reading in headsets or something like that. So it's important to understand that coding can help us to explore our research and get specific data that would be able to help us moving forward as well. It also can help us to map or look at trends. So we're going to see, during peacetime we notice this, during wartime we notice that, during Republican presidencies we notice this, over Democratic presidencies we notice that. So that data allows us those pinpoints, and without cold hard data we can't get that information and really, really focus on those things that we need to focus. It's more of a feeling, and the feelings aren't a good measuring tool oftentimes. So that's why we would use quantitative. Frequently we're going to be using both. We're going to be looking at the numbers, and we're going to say 80% of people showed an increase of blank, and we want to know why. So going back and looking at some of this qualitative research, it appeared that there was more of this and more of that, and we'll use them in conjunction to help further our research. Hopefully that all made sense. Hopefully it was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Enjoy the chapters, enjoy your papers, and I'll see you in the next class.